The lone figure on horseback was nothing more than a silhouette against the setting sun as he crested the hill overlooking Sweetwater Valley. Nathan Young had been riding for so long that the rhythm of his horse's hooves against the dusty trail had become the only constant in his life, a metronome marking time that seemed to stand still since Sarah's passing 3 years ago. The year was 1878, and the American West was still a place where a man could lose himself if he tried hard enough. Nathan had been trying for 3 long years. His weathered face, tanned by countless days under the merciless sun, rarely broke its stoic expression anymore. At 34, the lines around his eyes told stories of both laughter that had once been and grief that remained. The revolver at his hip was a necessity, not a choice in these untamed territories. His rifle rested in its leather scabbard, worn smooth by years of use. These were his companions now, steel and leather, since flesh and blood had left him. As the golden light faded from the horizon, Nathan nudged his chestnut mare, Copper, toward the town below. Sweetwater wasn't his destination, nowhere was his destination these days, but man and horse needed rest, and the distant glow of lamps promised at least that much. "Just for the night, girl," he murmured to Copper, whose ears twitched back at the rare sound of her master's voice. The main street of Sweetwater was typical of frontier towns, a wide dirt road lined with wooden structures fighting a losing battle against the elements. The saloon, predictably, was the most lively establishment, its windows glowing amber and the sounds of a poorly tuned piano spilling into the street. Nathan dismounted outside the livery stable, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. His movements were mechanical. Practiced caring for his horse before himself had become ritual. He paid the stable boy extra to ensure Copper would be brushed down and given fresh hay. "She'll be taken care of proper, mister," the freckled boy assured him, pocketing the coins with a grin that revealed a missing front tooth. With a nod, Nathan collected his saddlebags and bedroll, then headed toward the hotel across the street. The Grand Sweetwater Hotel was neither grand nor particularly sweet, but it promised a real bed and perhaps a bath, luxuries to a man who'd spent most nights under the stars with only the howl of coyotes for company. The proprietor, a balding man with suspicious eyes, sized Nathan up from behind the counter. "Rooms 50 cents, baths extra." Nathan placed the coins on the counter without haggling. "Bath 2. Second floor, end of the hall, bath'll be ready in an hour." Taking the key, Nathan climbed the creaking stairs to his room. It was sparse: a bed, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a chair that had seen better days. But it was clean enough, and for the first time in weeks, he'd sleep with a roof over his head. After placing his gun belt carefully on the nightstand within easy reach, Nathan stood before the mirror. The face that stared back at him was almost a stranger's, beard grown too long, hair touching his shoulders, eyes hollow. Sarah wouldn't recognize him now. The thought of Sarah sent a familiar ache through his chest. 3 years, and still the wound felt fresh. He'd buried her in a small plot overlooking their ranch, the ranch he couldn't bear to return to, with a simple wooden cross he'd carved himself. Influenza had taken her in less than a week, leaving him with nothing but memories and a crushing silence. After his bath, Nathan made his way to the saloon. Not for company, he'd had enough of that, but because sometimes the noise and chaos helped drown out his thoughts. The whiskey helped too. The Bucking Bronco Saloon lived up to its name, wild and untamed. Cowboys fresh from the trail, miners with pockets full of dreams if not gold, and the occasional drifter like himself filled the tables. Women in brightly colored dresses moved among them, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Nathan found a corner table with his back to the wall, a habit from years on the trail. He ordered whiskey and nursed it slowly, watching the room through eyes that missed nothing. There was a card game getting heated in one corner, a cowboy arguing with a saloon girl by the stairs, and the bartender keeping a shotgun within easy reach. It was the same scene he'd witnessed in dozens of towns across the territory. Different faces, same stories. Nathan had stopped caring about other people's stories a long time ago. He was considering ordering another whiskey when the saloon doors swung open. It wasn't an unusual occurrence, but something made Nathan look up. Perhaps it was the sudden lull in conversation, or maybe it was some long, dormant instinct stirring within him. A woman stood in the doorway, clearly out of place in the rough establishment. She wasn't dressed like the saloon girls. Her clothes were simple but respectable, a dark blue traveling dress with a matching bonnet. She removed the bonnet, revealing hair the color of burnished copper, pulled back in a practical but becoming style. Her face was flushed, either from the evening air or from the discomfort of entering such an establishment alone. The piano player missed a note, and the card players paused their game. A woman of her apparent standing didn't typically walk into a place like the bucking bronco unescorted. She scanned the room, her posture straight and determined despite the obvious discomfort. When her eyes met Nathan's across the room, something unexpected happened. She smiled. It wasn't the practiced smile of a saloon girl or the nervous smile of someone afraid. It was genuine, reaching her eyes and transforming her face. For a reason Nathan couldn't explain, he found himself unable to look away. The woman made her way through the crowded room, ignoring the whispers and stares. To Nathan's surprise, she stopped directly at his table. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice clear and composed. "I'm told you just arrived in town today with a chestnut mare." Nathan nodded cautiously, his hand unconsciously moving closer to his gun. "My name is Penelope Russell. I'm looking for a man who can guide me to Broken Pine, and the stable boy mentioned you came from that direction." She paused, then added, "I can pay, of course." Nathan hadn't been to Broken Pine in almost a year, though he'd passed near it on his wandering route. It was a 3-day ride at least, through territory that wasn't kind to travelers, especially not a woman alone. "Why Broken Pine?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "My brother's there. He's sick." Her composure wavered slightly. "I received a telegram last week." Nathan took another sip of his whiskey, considering. He had nowhere to be, true, but he'd spent 3 years avoiding attachments of any kind. Guiding this woman would mean days in her company, responsibility for her safety. "There's a stage that runs that way," he offered. "Not for another week." "I can't wait that long." There was urgency in her voice, but also determination. "Please, Mr. Young, Nathan Young, Mr. Young, I'm prepared to pay well for your services." Nathan was about to refuse when she smiled again, that same genuine smile that had caught him off guard. It wasn't manipulative or pleading, it was grateful, as if he'd already agreed to help her. "I don't need your money, Miss Russell," he said finally, "but Broken Pine isn't a safe journey. I understand the risks, but my brother is all the family I have left in this world." Something in her eyes spoke of loss that matched his own. "I have to try." Nathan recognized the resolve in her voice. It was the same determination he'd felt when trying everything possible to save Sarah, calling for doctors from 3 towns over, spending their savings on medicines that did no good, praying to a God who didn't answer. "We leave at first light," he said, surprising himself with the words. "Pack light and wear practical clothes. That dress won't do for riding." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, Mr. Young, I'll be ready." She turned to leave, then paused. The stable boy was right about another thing. Nathan raised an eyebrow in question. He said you looked like a man who keeps his word. With that, she was gone, leaving Nathan to wonder what madness had possessed him to agree. He didn't want company, didn't want responsibility, didn't want to care whether this woman reached her brother in time or not. But that smile had caught him off guard, the first genuine human connection he'd felt in 3 years of riding alone. And despite himself, he couldn't ignore it. Morning came with a sky the color of faded denim, promising clear weather for at least the start of their journey. Nathan was at the livery before dawn, checking Copper's shoes and saddle, ensuring everything was in order. He'd purchased supplies from the general store the previous evening: extra ammunition, dried beef, coffee, beans, and hardtack. Practical provisions for the trail. The stable boy was yawning as he helped Nathan prepare a second horse, a steady bay gelding that would suit an inexperienced rider. That lady sure was determined to find someone heading to Broken Pine, the boy commented. Asked near about everyone coming through yesterday. Nathan grunted, not encouraging conversation. His mind was already questioning his decision. 3 years of solitude had dulled his social skills, if he'd ever had any to begin with. 3 days or more with a woman who was clearly educated and proper seemed like a special kind of torture. The sun was just cresting the eastern hills when Penelope Russell appeared at the stable door. Nathan had to admit she'd taken his advice. She wore a split riding skirt of sturdy brown fabric, a simple white shirtwaist, and a short jacket. Her hair was braided and pinned up practically, and she wore a wide-brimmed hat secured with a scarf. She carried only a small valise and what looked like a medical bag. "Good morning, Mr. Young," she greeted him, her voice bright despite the early hour. Nathan nodded in acknowledgement. "You travel light. Good. I've learned that necessities are different on the frontier than in Boston," she replied, setting her bags down. "I've been in the territory for almost a year now." This surprised Nathan. Her manner of speech and bearing clearly marked her as Eastern, educated. "What brings a Boston lady to these parts? I'm a nurse. I came west with a doctor who wanted to establish a practice in Silver Creek." There was more to the story, Nathan suspected, but she didn't elaborate. "Is this to be my mount?" Nathan helped her secure her bags to the saddle. "His name's Tucker. He's steady, won't give you trouble." She approached the horse confidently, letting him sniff her hand before stroking his nose. "Hello, Tucker. We've got an important journey ahead." The horse nickered softly, seeming to approve of his temporary owner. Nathan watched with grudging approval. At least she wasn't afraid of horses, which would have made their journey considerably more difficult. "You've ridden before?" he asked. "Yes, though it's been some time." She put her foot in the stirrup and mounted with more grace than he'd expected. "My father believed all proper young ladies should know how to ride." "Your father was right about that much, at least." Nathan checked her saddle and stirrups, adjusting them slightly. "We'll take it slow at first, let you get accustomed again." Within the hour, they were leaving Sweetwater behind, the town shrinking in the distance as they rode northwest toward Broken Pine. The terrain started gently enough, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that rippled like water in the morning breeze. In the distance, however, the jagged outline of mountains reminded them of the more challenging landscape to come. They rode mostly in silence through the morning. Nathan was accustomed to quiet, and Penelope seemed content to focus on her riding, which improved noticeably as the hours passed. She sat straighter in the saddle, finding the rhythm of Tucker's gait. It was close to midday when she finally broke the silence. "Do you make this journey often, Mr. Young?" Nathan considered his answer. "I don't make any journey often. I go where the wind takes me." "A true wanderer," she observed, studying him. The stable boy mentioned you came from the direction of Broken Pine, but not from the town itself. I passed near it some months back. Haven't been in the town for about a year. Penelope adjusted her hat against the climbing sun. What do you do, if I may ask? For occupation, Nathan almost smiled at the formality of her question. These days, nothing much. I hunt when I need meat. Take odd jobs when I need money. He paused. Used to have a ranch south of here. Used to, she prompted when he didn't continue. Nathan fell silent again, and Penelope seemed to understand she'd touched on something private. She didn't press further. They stopped by a small creek to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Penelope unpacked a small tin of dried fruit, which she shared with Nathan. My brother James has been in Broken Pine for 2 years, she said as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. He went west before me, looking to make his fortune in silver mining. There's not much silver left in those hills, Nathan commented. Most of the good claims were tapped out years ago, so I've gathered. His letters became less frequent, less optimistic. She twisted the simple gold band she wore on her right hand, not a wedding ring, Nathan noted. The telegram said pneumonia. That's why I can't wait for the stage. Pneumonia can turn fatal quickly if not treated properly. Nathan knew this all too well. Sarah's influenza had settled in her lungs at the end. You said you're a nurse. You think you can help him. I have to try. I've brought medicines, treatments. She gestured to the medical bag. James is stubborn. He wouldn't have sent for me unless he was truly ill. Nathan nodded, understanding the bond between siblings. He'd had a brother once, lost to the war that had torn the country apart. Thomas had ridden south with the Confederacy, while Nathan had stayed on their family farm in Missouri. Neither choice had been about slavery, just different ideas of duty and loyalty. Thomas never came home. We should keep moving, he said, getting to his feet. I want to make it to Cottonwood Crossing by nightfall. They continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they rode. The gentle hills gave way to more rugged terrain, dotted with juniper and pinyon pines. Nathan kept a watchful eye on the horizon and the trail ahead. This country was mostly peaceful now, but dangers still existed: bandits, wild animals, and the unpredictable nature of the land itself. Penelope proved to be a more capable rider than Nathan had initially given her credit for. She didn't complain about the pace or the discomfort, though he could tell by the careful way she dismounted during their brief stops that she was feeling the effects of hours in the saddle. As the afternoon wore on, Nathan found himself watching her more than he should. There was something compelling about her, a quiet strength beneath the proper exterior. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but her features were pleasing, her expressions genuine. Her eyes, he noticed, were an unusual shade of green, like the moss that grew along the banks of mountain streams. How much farther to this Cottonwood Crossing? She asked as the shadows lengthened. Another hour, maybe less. It's not a town, just a small trading post and a few cabins. But the owner, Franklin, is a good man. He'll put us up for the night. You know him well, Nathan shrugged. Met him a few times over the years. He's been at that crossing for as long as I can remember. Used to trade with the Indians before most were moved to reservations. The sun was casting long shadows when they finally arrived at Cottonwood Crossing. It was just as Nathan had described, a sturdy log trading post with a few smaller cabins scattered nearby, situated where the trail crossed a wide, shallow river lined with cottonwood trees. An old man with a beard as white as snow sat in a rocking chair on the porch, a rifle across his knees. He squinted at them as they approached, then broke into a smile of recognition. Well, I'll be damned. Nathan Young, as I live and breathe. He stood up with surprising agility for his apparent age. Thought you might have died out there in the wilderness, son." "Not yet, Franklin," Nathan replied, dismounting. "Though not for lack of trying, some might say." Franklin laughed, then noticed Penelope. His bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "Miss Penelope Russell," Nathan introduced her. "We're headed to Broken Pine. Thought we might impose on your hospitality for the night." "No imposition at all. It's been a quiet spell. Company's welcome." Franklin helped Penelope down from her horse with old-fashioned courtesy. "My wife will be pleased to have another woman to talk to. Gets tired of my stories, she does." Franklin's wife, Martha, was as warm and welcoming as her husband. A small, bird-like woman with bright eyes and capable hands, she immediately took Penelope under her wing, showing her to a small but clean room in the main building, and insisting she come to the kitchen to warm up after her journey. Nathan took care of the horses, then joined Franklin on the porch. The old man offered him a pipe, which Nathan declined, and a tin cup of whiskey, which he accepted. "Never thought I'd see you traveling with a companion," Franklin observed, settling back into his rocker. "Especially not one like her. She's quality, that one." Nathan sipped the whiskey, feeling its familiar burn. "I'm just guiding her to her brother, nothing more." Franklin's eyes, still sharp despite his years, studied Nathan's face. "Hum, and I'm just sitting on this porch to admire the scenery," he chuckled. "How long's it been now, Nathan?" 3 years since Sarah." 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Nathan replied without hesitation. The precision of his answer hung between them in the gathering dusk. Franklin nodded slowly. "Too long to be riding alone, son." Nathan didn't respond. He'd had this conversation before with Franklin, with other old friends who thought they knew what was best for him. They didn't understand that the emptiness inside him couldn't be filled by another person. Sarah had been his heart, and when she died, he'd buried his heart with her. Inside the trading post, Martha had prepared a simple but hearty meal: venison stew, cornbread, and canned peaches for dessert. The 4 of them sat around the scarred wooden table, the room warm and golden in the light of oil lamps. Penelope was animated as she spoke with Martha about the older woman's life at the trading post. Nathan found himself watching her again, noticing how her hands moved expressively when she talked, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Nathan tells me you're a nurse," Franklin said to Penelope. "We could use more medical folk in these parts." "I came west with Dr. Hammond last year," she explained. "We established a practice in Silver Creek." "Hammond, the name's familiar," Martha mused. "He's quite well known in certain circles. He had innovative ideas about frontier medicine." There was a hint of something sadness, regret, in Penelope's voice. "Unfortunately, he returned east 3 months ago. His wife couldn't adjust to life here." "And you stayed?" Franklin asked. Penelope nodded. "I've continued nursing in Silver Creek. There's so much need here, and—" She hesitated. "I find I prefer the West despite its hardships. People are more direct. Life is more authentic somehow." Nathan found himself surprisingly interested in her story. "It's not an easy life for a woman alone." "No easier than for a man alone, I imagine," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "Loneliness doesn't discriminate based on gender, Mr. Young." The simple observation struck him with unexpected force. Was that what he'd been doing these past 3 years, not just grieving, but choosing loneliness as a form of penance? As if by denying himself human connection, he could somehow atone for failing to save Sarah. After dinner, Penelope excused herself early, citing the long day of travel. When she was gone, Martha fixed Nathan with a knowing look. "That young woman has known sorrow," she declared. "I recognize the signs." "We all have our burdens," Nathan replied noncommittally. "True enough." Martha began clearing the dishes. but some choose to carry them alone when they don't have to. Nathan helped Franklin secure the trading post for the night, checking doors and windows out of habit. The old couple had created something rare out here, a true home, a place of safety and comfort in the wilderness. Nathan had had that once with Sarah, before influenza stole it all away. He slept poorly that night, his dreams a confusing blend of past and present. Sarah's face faded into Penelope's, both women calling to him from across a distance he couldn't cross. He woke before dawn, sweating despite the cool night air. Stepping outside, Nathan watched the stars beginning to fade as the eastern sky lightened almost imperceptibly. The world was silent except for the soft rushing of the river and the occasional call of a night bird. These quiet hours had been his only companions for so long. "You're an early riser, too." Nathan turned to find Penelope standing a few feet away, wrapped in a shawl against the pre-dawn chill. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, making her look younger, less formal. "Force of habit," he replied. She moved to stand beside him, both of them looking east. "It's beautiful here, so different from Boston." "What was it like, Boston?" Nathan surprised himself with the question. He rarely asked about others' lives, crowded, noisy, full of people convinced that civilization ends at the Mississippi. She smiled slightly. "My father was a doctor. He wanted me to marry one of his colleagues, a respectable man who would give me a respectable life in a respectable part of town. And instead, you came west with Dr. Hammond." She nodded. "I wanted to make a difference, to see places I'd only read about." Her expression grew distant. "My father was so angry. He said I was throwing my life away, that I'd come crawling back within a year. We haven't spoken since." "And your brother, he came west first, you said." "James always had wanderlust. He went to California in '68, then Nevada, then Colorado, following rumors of silver strikes." She twisted the gold band on her finger again. "He's all I have left now, with mother gone and father, well." Nathan understood what it meant to have only one person left who mattered, and he understood the desperate fear of losing that person too. "We should reach Broken Pine tomorrow evening if the weather holds," he told her. "Sooner if we push hard." "Thank you, Mr. Young. I know you didn't have to agree to guide me." Their eyes met in the growing light. For a moment, Nathan felt an unfamiliar sensation, a connection, a recognition of something shared. It was uncomfortable, unsettling. He looked away first. "We should get ready to leave. Long day ahead." They departed Cottonwood Crossing after a hearty breakfast and effusive farewells from Franklin and Martha. The old couple had pressed extra supplies on them, Martha's freshly baked bread, dried apple slices, and jerky from Franklin's smokehouse. "You take care of each other out there," Martha had said, hugging Penelope and, to his surprise, Nathan as well. Her words seemed to carry a meaning beyond the immediate journey. The second day of travel took them into more difficult terrain. The trail climbed steadily, winding through pine forests and rocky outcroppings. The air grew cooler and thinner as they ascended. Nathan set a careful pace, mindful of the horses and of Penelope's comfort, though she made no complaint. They talked more than the previous day, the silence between them no longer as pronounced. Penelope told him about her nursing experiences, both in Boston's crowded hospitals and in the frontier town of Silver Creek. "The diseases are often the same, but the causes and conditions are so different," she explained. "In the city, it's overcrowding, poor sanitation. Here, it's isolation, lack of proper medical care, and the elements themselves." "How did your brother end up with pneumonia?" Nathan asked. His last letter mentioned working in one of the remaining silver mines. "The conditions are damp, cold. Lung diseases are common among miners." She adjusted her hat against the midday sun. When I was nursing in Boston, I saw many miners with similar conditions. Coal dust in the lungs, infections that wouldn't clear. Nathan nodded. He'd known men who'd gone into the mines and come out changed, their lungs damaged, their bodies broken by the brutal work. Not an easy way to make a living. James never did choose the easy path. There was both fondness and exasperation in her voice. He's brilliant, truly. He studied engineering briefly at Harvard before deciding books couldn't teach him what he wanted to know about the world. Sounds like a restless spirit. Yes, much like yourself, I imagine. She glanced at him curiously. You mentioned you had a ranch once. What happened? Nathan was silent for so long that Penelope clearly thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. My wife, Sarah. She died 3 years ago, influenza. The simple statement couldn't convey the devastation of those days, Sarah's fever climbing despite everything he tried. The doctor's grave face. Her last breath as dawn broke over the hills they'd both loved. The emptiness of the house afterward, the sounds of her absence louder than any noise had ever been. I'm so sorry, Penelope said softly. It's a cruel disease. After she was gone, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories. Nathan kept his eyes on the trail ahead. I sold the stock, left the house as it was, and started riding. Haven't stopped since. And your family? None to speak of. My parents died before the war, had a brother but he was killed at Vicksburg. Penelope was quiet for a moment. It's a hard thing to be the one left behind. Something in her tone made Nathan look at her. You speak from experience. She nodded, her eyes on some distant point. My husband, Edward. We'd been married less than a year when he shipped out with the Union Army in '64. He never came home. Nathan hadn't noticed a wedding ring, but now he understood the gold band she wore on her right hand rather than her left. The war took too many good men, he said simply. Yes, and left too many of us wondering what might have been. She straightened in her saddle. So we both understand loss, Mr. Young. Perhaps that's why Franklin's wife said what she did about carrying burdens alone. Nathan didn't respond. He wasn't ready to acknowledge the parallels between them, the shared experience of having life torn apart by forces beyond control. Penelope had obviously found a way to continue living, to make her life meaningful through her nursing. He was still wandering, looking for something he couldn't name. They stopped for a brief rest at midday in a small clearing beside a stream. While Penelope refreshed herself with cool water, Nathan scanned the surrounding forest with practiced eyes. Something felt off, a silence where there should have been bird calls, perhaps, or just the prickling at the back of his neck that had kept him alive in dangerous situations before. We should move on, he said, cutting their rest short. I don't like the feel of this place. Penelope didn't question him, quickly gathering her things and remounting Tucker. They continued along the trail, which narrowed as it climbed along the edge of a steep slope. The forest pressed close on their right, while a drop of several hundred feet yawned on their left. They had ridden perhaps another mile when Nathan heard it, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. He reacted instantly, grabbing Copper's reins in one hand and Tucker's in the other, hauling both horses off the trail into the cover of the trees just as a shot rang out. Down, he ordered Penelope, who had already dropped low over her horse's neck. Nathan drew his revolver, eyes scanning the ridge above them where the shot had originated. Road agents, he said grimly. Likely been watching the trail for travelers. What do we do? Penelope's voice was tense but controlled. Stay down, stay quiet. There's a fork in the trail about a quarter-mile ahead. We'll make a run for it, take the lower path. It's rougher going but less exposed. He listened carefully. There were at least 2 of them up there, maybe more, moving to get a better position. Nathan had faced worse odds, but he had Penelope to worry about now. When I say go, you ride hard and don't look back. Understand, she nodded, her face pale but determined. Nathan waited until he heard movement on the ridge above them, the bandits repositioning, trying to get a clear shot. Now, he shouted, slapping Tucker's rump hard. Both horses burst from the cover of the trees. Penelope bent low over Tucker's neck as Nathan had instructed. Nathan followed close behind, placing himself between her and the ridge. Another shot cracked, splintering bark from a tree just ahead of them. They galloped down the trail, hooves thundering on the hard, packed earth. Nathan saw the fork ahead, one path continuing along the ridge, the other dropping sharply down toward the valley below. Left, he shouted to Penelope, who guided Tucker onto the descending trail without hesitation. The path was treacherous, steep, and strewn with loose rocks. The horses had to pick their way carefully, even as urgency demanded speed. Nathan kept looking back, but there was no sign of immediate pursuit. The bandits would have to circle around to the fork, giving them some lead time. They descended rapidly, the forest growing thicker around them, offering more cover. When they reached a small stream cutting across the path, Nathan finally called a halt. "We'll stop here, let the horses drink. Need to check if we're being followed." Penelope dismounted, her hands shaking slightly but her composure otherwise intact. "Will they come after us?" "Depends how determined they are. Most road agents look for easy targets. Once you show you can fight back, they often move on." Nathan unsaddled Copper, checking her for any injuries. "But we won't take chances. We'll rest here briefly, then find a more defensible position for the night." As Nathan had predicted, there was no sign of pursuit. Either the bandits had decided they weren't worth the trouble, or they'd lost their trail in the dense forest. By dusk, they'd found a small cave set into a hillside, offering shelter and protection with only one entrance to defend. Nathan built a small fire near the mouth of the cave, keeping it low to minimize visible smoke. The horses were secured nearby, contentedly grazing on the lush grass that grew along the stream. Penelope had been quiet since their escape, but now she approached Nathan as he prepared a simple meal from their supplies. "Thank you," she said. "Your quick thinking saved us both." Nathan shrugged. "Just doing what needed doing." Nevertheless, she sat beside him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent that somehow clung to her despite days on the trail. "I'm grateful you were with me. I wouldn't have known what to do on my own." "You'd have managed," Nathan said, surprising himself with the vote of confidence. "You keep your head in a crisis. That's more than most can say." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. High praise from a man of few words. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the day having shifted something between them. Danger had a way of stripping away pretenses, leaving only what was essential. Nathan found himself studying her in the firelight, the gentle curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, the quiet strength in her eyes. "We'll have to take a different route tomorrow," he said eventually. "It'll add a few hours to the journey, but we'll still reach Broken Pine tomorrow." "Yes, by nightfall if we start at first light." Penelope nodded, relief evident in her expression. "James will be wondering what's delayed me. I sent a telegram from Silver Creek before I left, letting him know I was coming. He's lucky to have a sister willing to brave bandits and wilderness for him." "Wouldn't you do the same for someone you loved?" she asked. The question hung in the air between them. 3 years ago, Nathan would have done anything for Sarah, had done everything humanly possible. But it hadn't been enough. "Yes," he answered finally. "I would." They slept in shifts, Nathan taking the first watch. He sat at the mouth of the cave, rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Behind him, Penelope slept wrapped in her blanket, her breathing deep and regular. In the quiet darkness, Nathan allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd been avoiding all day. Penelope, Russell was working her way past the barriers he'd built around himself. Her smile, her courage, her direct way of speaking, all of it was beginning to matter to him in a way that nothing had mattered since Sarah's death. The realization was uncomfortable. He'd grown accustomed to numbness, to the dull ache of grief that had become almost comforting in its familiarity. Feeling something new, interest, concern, perhaps even attraction, was disorienting, as if he were betraying Sarah's memory. When it was Penelope's turn to watch, Nathan found sleep elusive. He lay with his eyes closed, aware of her sitting nearby, a silent guardian in the darkness. The knowledge that she was there, that he wasn't alone for the first time in years, brought a strange peace that eventually lulled him to sleep. Morning came with a heavy mist that clung to the trees, turning the forest into a ghostly landscape. They set out early, as planned, following a game trail that Nathan knew would eventually connect with the main route to Broken Pine. The day's journey was arduous, the path often barely discernible through the dense underbrush. They had to dismount and lead the horses in several places where fallen trees or rock slides blocked the way. By midday, both were tired and damp from the mist that refused to burn off. "The town's in the next valley," Nathan told Penelope as they paused to rest on a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. "We'll reach it before dark." She nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I hope we're not too late." "Your brother's strong if he's survived mining this long, and stubborn, from what you've said. That counts for a lot out here." Penelope smiled gratefully at his attempt at reassurance. "James always was too mule-headed for his own good. Even as children, he'd never admit when he was hurt or sick." "Sounds like most men I know," Nathan commented wryly. "We're not good at admitting weakness." "Is that why you've been riding alone for 3 years?" she asked, her gaze direct. "Because admitting you need human connection would be a weakness." The question caught Nathan off guard. No one had challenged his solitude so directly before. Most people he encountered respected the invisible barrier he'd erected around himself, or at least pretended to. "It's not about weakness," he said after a long moment. "It's about moving on when there's nowhere to move to." Penelope considered his words. "I understand that feeling. After Edward died, I couldn't imagine a future that made sense without him in it." She looked out over the valley. "Nursing gave me purpose when nothing else did, but purpose isn't the same as connection." Nathan had no response. She'd articulated something he'd felt, but never put into words: the difference between existing and living, between having a reason to continue and having a reason to hope. They continued their journey, the trail gradually widening as they descended into the valley where Broken Pine nestled among the foothills. By late afternoon, the first scattered buildings came into view, rough-hewn structures built more for function than beauty. Broken Pine had seen better days. Once a bustling mining town with dreams of becoming the next Virginia city, it had dwindled as the silver veins ran dry, and the miners moved on to more promising claims. What remained was a settlement of perhaps 300 souls, those too stubborn or too attached to leave, and those with nowhere else to go. The main street was mostly deserted as they rode in, the few people visible stopping to stare at the newcomers. A general store, a saloon, a smithy, and a small church made up the business district. Houses of varying quality spread outward from the center, with mine entrances visible in the hillsides beyond. "You know where your brother lives?" Nathan asked as they passed beneath a faded wooden arch that proclaimed Broken Pine, silver capital of the territory, in peeling paint. His last letter mentioned a boarding house run by a widow named Simmons. "On the north end of town," he said. They found the boarding house without difficulty, a two-story wooden structure with a sagging porch but clean windows and smoke rising from the chimney. Nathan helped Penelope dismount, noting how she winced slightly after the long hours in the saddle. A plump woman with iron-gray hair tied in a severe bun opened the door before they could knock. "You must be James's sister," she said without preamble. "Been expecting you since yesterday. I'm Mrs. Simmons." "Yes, I'm Penelope Russell. We were delayed on the trail. How is my brother, Mrs.?" Simmons's expression softened. "He's holding his own, Miss Russell. The doctor's been by twice today. Said it was good you were coming, you being a nurse and all." Relief flooded Penelope's face. "He's still here then, still. Fighting. Indeed he is. Stubborn as they come, your brother, Mrs." Simmons ushered them inside. "And who might this gentleman be?" "Nathan Young. He guided me from Sweetwater." Mrs. Simmons gave Nathan an appraising look. "Well, Mr. Young, I reckon you'll be needing a room too. Got one available next to Miss Russell's if that suits." Nathan hesitated. His task was complete. He delivered Penelope safely to her brother. There was no reason for him to stay, and yet the thought of riding away immediately felt wrong somehow. "That would be fine, thank you," he heard himself say. "Just for a night or two. I'll have Rufus see to your horses, Mrs." Simmons said, referring to a teenage boy who had appeared at the sound of their arrival. "Miss Russell, I imagine you'd like to see your brother straight away." Penelope turned to Nathan, uncertainty in her eyes. "Mr. Young, would you?" "Go on," he said gently. "That's why we came all this way. I'll see to our things." With a grateful nod, Penelope followed Mrs. Simmons upstairs, leaving Nathan in the modest but well-kept front parlor. He felt oddly bereft in her absence, as if something essential had suddenly gone missing. Rufus helped him unload their belongings and care for the horses. The boy was eager to talk, filling Nathan in on the town's recent history without much prompting. "Most of the mines played out 2 years back," he explained as they brushed down the tired animals. "Some folks left, but others stayed on, found ways to make do. Mr. Russell now, he's been working the Blue Heaven mine. Him and a couple others think there's still good silver to be found deeper in. And that's where he got sick," Rufus nodded. "Mining's wet work in these parts. Cold, too. Men get the lung sickness if they're not careful." He glanced toward the boarding house. "His sister coming all this way, that means something. Most folks out here don't have family willing to cross half the country for them." Nathan thought of his own solitary existence, the deliberate severance of connections. "No, they don't," he agreed quietly. By the time Nathan had settled into his room, a small but clean space with a narrow bed, washstand, and chair, evening had fallen. Mrs. Simmons had informed him that dinner would be served in the dining room at 7, and that Penelope was still with her brother. Nathan washed away the dust of travel as best he could and changed into his cleanest shirt. The boarding house was quiet except for the occasional creak of floorboards and the distant murmur of voices from the other occupied rooms. He was standing at the window, watching the lamplights of broken pine flicker on in the gathering darkness, when a soft knock came at his door. He opened it to find Penelope, looking tired but less anxious than before. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, "for bringing me here safely. How's your brother?" "Sick, but not as badly as I feared. The pneumonia is in its early stages. With proper care, rest, and the medicines I brought, I believe he'll recover." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen since they'd left Sweetwater. "Your guidance made that possible, Mr. Young. Another few days and it might have been too late." "I'm glad," Nathan said simply. Penelope hesitated, then asked, "Will you join us for dinner? James is sleeping now, but I'd like you to meet him tomorrow. He should know the man who helped save his life." The invitation surprised Nathan. He'd assumed his role in Penelope's story was finish the guide who'd done his job and would now fade into the background as she reunited with her brother. "I'd like that," he found himself saying. "Both dinner and meeting your brother tomorrow." Her smile widened, warming her eyes. "Good, Mrs. Simmons says she sets a fine table, and after days of trail food, I'm inclined to believe anything that promises a hot meal." Dinner proved to be everything Mrs. Simmons had promised: roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The boarding house's other residents included the town's schoolteacher, a retired miner and his wife, and a young clerk from the assay office. Conversation flowed easily around the table, with Nathan content to listen more than speak. He noticed how naturally Penelope engaged with everyone, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to the answers. She had a gift for making people feel valued. He realized a quality that likely made her an excellent nurse. After dinner, most of the boarders retired to their rooms, but Nathan and Penelope lingered in the parlor. A small fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the simple furnishings. "It's strange," Penelope said softly, gazing into the flames. 3 days ago you were a stranger. Yet I feel I've known you much longer." "Shared danger has that effect," Nathan replied, though he knew it was more than that. "Makes people see each other clearly, without pretense." "Is that why you've avoided connections these past years? To avoid being seen clearly?" The directness of her question didn't offend him as it might have days earlier. "Maybe. Or maybe I just didn't want to see myself clearly." He paused. "After Sarah died, I became someone I didn't recognize: angry, bitter. Easier to be alone than to inflict that on others." Penelope's eyes, luminous in the firelight, studied his face. "And now?" Nathan considered the question. These past days with Penelope had awakened something he'd thought long dead: not just interest in another person, but interest in life itself. The numbness that had been his constant companion was receding, leaving both pain and possibility in its wake. "Now I'm not sure who I am," he admitted. "But I know I'm not the same man who rode into Sweetwater 3 days ago." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing upward. In that moment of warmth and quiet, Nathan felt a profound sense of being at a crossroads. One path led back to the solitary existence he'd chosen after Sarah's death: familiar, safe in its emptiness. The other led into unknown territory, with all the risk and reward that entailed. Penelope seemed to sense his internal struggle. "It's frightening, isn't it, to consider changing the pattern of your life?" "Yes," he met her gaze directly, "but perhaps necessary." They said goodnight shortly after, each retiring to their respective rooms. Nathan lay awake for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought him here: not just the physical miles from Sweetwater to Broken Pine, but the emotional distance he'd traveled since meeting Penelope Russell. The next morning, Nathan met James Russell. The family resemblance was evident: the same copper-colored hair, though James's was darker, the same determined set to the jaw. But where Penelope's eyes were green, her brother's were a deep blue. He was propped up in bed, his face pale but his handshake firm when Nathan entered the room. "So you're the man who brought my sister safely through bandit country," James said, his voice hoarse but strong enough. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Young." "No debt," Nathan replied. "Your sister is persuasive." James chuckled, which turned into a cough. Penelope, who had been organizing medicines on a small table, immediately poured water from a pitcher and helped her brother drink. "That she is," James agreed when the coughing subsided. "Has been since we were children." When Penny sets her mind to something, heaven help anyone who stands in her way. Penelope rolled her eyes at the childhood nickname. "James exaggerates. I simply believe in speaking directly when necessary." Like when you told Dr. Hammond his treatment for typhoid was outdated, James teased weakly. Or when you informed that mining company representative that his safety standards were criminally negligent. Nathan raised an eyebrow at Penelope, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. Both statements were accurate, she defended herself. And boldly delivered, James added with obvious affection. To Nathan, he explained, my sister has many virtues, but diplomacy isn't always among them. The siblings' easy banter revealed a closeness that made Nathan think of his own brother Thomas. They'd had that once, the shared jokes, the comfortable understanding that comes from growing up together. Another loss in a life marked by them. Mr. Young has agreed to stay in Broken Pine for a few days, Penelope told her brother. I thought perhaps you could tell him about the mining operations here. He used to have a ranch south of Sweetwater. James's eyes lit with interest. Ranching and mining are the backbone of these territories. Different work but similar men, I've found. He studied Nathan. Though you don't strike me as someone who's been behind a plow recently. Sold the ranch 3 years back, Nathan admitted. Been on the move since then. Understanding passed between the two men the recognition of someone who had chosen a rootless existence, whether by necessity or design. James didn't press for details, and Nathan appreciated the restraint. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Penelope spent most of her time caring for James, whose condition improved steadily under her attentive nursing. Nathan found himself exploring Broken Pine, getting a feel for the town and its residents. He discovered that despite its diminished circumstances, the community was resilient. The mines might be producing less silver than in their heyday, but the people had adapted, focusing on sustainable logging in the surrounding forests, raising livestock in the valley, creating a community that could endure beyond the boom and bust cycle of mining. Each evening, Nathan would join Penelope for dinner, either in the boarding house dining room or, as James regained strength, in his room. Their conversations ranged widely from the political changes reshaping the post-war nation to the practical challenges of frontier life, from literature to medicine. Nathan found himself talking more than he had in years, drawn out by Penelope's genuine interest and thoughtful responses. She never treated his opinions as less valuable because he lacked her formal education, and in turn, he respected her knowledge and experience without feeling threatened by it. As James's recovery progressed, he began joining them in the parlor after dinner. Nathan discovered that the Russell siblings shared not only physical traits, but also a lively intelligence and curiosity about the world. James's experiences in mining camps across the West had given him a practical education to complement his brief formal studies, and he proved to be an engaging storyteller. A week passed, then another. Nathan told himself he was staying to ensure James's full recovery, to see Penelope safely established in Broken Pine. But the truth, which he was beginning to acknowledge at least to himself, was simpler: he wasn't ready to leave. For the first time in 3 years, he had found something that felt like belonging. The townsfolk had begun to accept Nathan's presence, nodding and greeting when he passed on the street. He'd even taken on some work helping the blacksmith with a particularly difficult job that required an extra pair of strong hands, assisting in repairing the church roof damaged in a recent storm. One evening, as Nathan sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Penelope joined him. She'd been at the small clinic on the other side of town, where she'd begun volunteering her nursing skills. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, gesturing toward the panoramic view. Nathan nodded. Different from the ranch, the mountains, there were distant blue shapes on the horizon. Here, there, immediate. "Do you miss it, the ranch?" Penelope asked quietly. Nathan considered the question. I miss what it was when Sarah was alive, not what it became after. Tell me about her. About Sarah. Penelope's request was gentle, tentative. No one had asked Nathan about Sarah in years. Most people who knew him before her death avoided the subject, and those he'd met after didn't know to ask. The invitation to speak of her was both painful and oddly freeing. She was alive. That's the word that always comes to mind. Everything she did fully, laughing, working, loving. Nathan's voice grew soft with memory. She wasn't from ranching stock originally. Her father was a school teacher who moved west for his health. But she took to it like she was born to it, learned to ride and rope, to garden in soil that didn't want to yield, to make a home in a place that could be unforgiving. Penelope listened without interrupting, her face attentive in the fading light. When I met her, I was 25, just back from the war, trying to build something from the scraps of the family farm. She was teaching at the local school. A small smile touched Nathan's lips. I couldn't speak 2 words together around her at first. She was so bright, so full of ideas and hope, despite everything the war had taken from all of us. How did you court her? Badly at first. I'd bring her wild flowers, stand awkwardly at the schoolhouse door. The memory was bittersweet. Then one day, there was a flash flood threatening the school. I helped evacuate the children, get them to higher ground. Sarah was fearless, organized the older ones to help with the younger, kept everyone calm. Afterward, she looked at me, covered in mud and soaked to the skin, and said, "Mr. Young, I believe it's time you took me to dinner." Penelope laughed softly. She sounds remarkable. She was. Nathan paused, feeling the familiar ache but also, surprisingly, a sense of gratitude for what he'd had. We had 6 good years together, built the ranch from almost nothing, made it profitable. We're talking about children when. He trailed off. When she fell ill, Penelope finished gently. Nathan nodded. Influenza swept through the county that spring. Sarah was helping nurse others before she caught it herself. By the time we realized how serious it was. He shook his head. The doctor did what he could. I did what I could. It wasn't enough. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Nathan felt drained but also unburdened, as if sharing Sarah with someone who had never known her had somehow made her more real again, not just a source of grief but a person who had lived and loved. "Thank you for telling me about her," Penelope said finally, "for sharing her with me." Nathan turned to look at her, realizing something important. "You're the first person who's asked about her in years, not about her death but about her life." "Her life is what matters," Penelope said simply. "Who she was, what she meant to you, that's what should be remembered." In that moment, Nathan felt something shift within him, a recognition that honoring Sarah's memory didn't require shutting himself off from life. Perhaps, in fact, it required the opposite. The following Sunday, Nathan found himself doing something he hadn't done since Sarah's funeral, attending church. The small white building had been repaired after the storm, and most of Broken Pine's residents filled the simple wooden pews. Nathan sat beside Penelope, with James on her other side. The younger man was still pale but much improved, able to walk short distances without becoming winded. His colleagues from the Blue Heaven mine had kept his position open, understanding that good engineers were hard to come by in the territory. The service was simple, the hymns familiar from Nathan's youth. He didn't sing along but found comfort in the ritual, in being part of something communal after so long alone. When Penelope's hand brushed against his during a prayer, he didn't pull away. After the service, there was a community dinner on the church grounds. Long tables had been set up under the pine trees, laden with dishes brought by the congregation: fried chicken, biscuits, cornbread, pies of every description. Children ran playing between the tables, their laughter bright in the spring air. Nathan found himself drawn into conversation with the town's sheriff, a grizzled former cavalry officer named Hargrove, and several of the miners who worked with James. They discussed the territory's changing economy, the railroad that was rumored to be coming within 20 miles of Broken Pine, the possibilities for the town's future. "We need men with diverse skills," Hargrove was saying. "Too many mining towns die when the ore runs out. Broken Pine's got potential beyond silver, good water, timber, grazing land." Nathan found himself considering the landscape with new eyes, assessing the soil, the water sources, the potential for sustainable ranching operations. His expertise, dormant for years, resurfaced naturally. Later, as the gathering was breaking up, Penelope found Nathan helping to clear the tables. "You looked at home today," she observed, talking with the sheriff and the others. Nathan realized she was right. For the first time in years, he had engaged with a community without feeling like an outsider looking in. "It's a good town," he acknowledged. "Reminds me of Clearwater, where Sarah and I had the ranch before the boom years changed it." "James told me something interesting yesterday," Penelope said as they walked back toward the boarding house. "The Wilkins place, just north of town, is for sale. The old couple who owned it are moving east to live with their daughter. It's a small spread, but good water rights, some decent grazing land." Nathan glanced at her, wondering at her purpose in sharing this information. "Thinking of taking up ranching, Miss Russell?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Not personally, no. But I thought perhaps you might be interested." The suggestion caught Nathan by surprise. "I haven't considered settling anywhere in a long time." "I know." Penelope's expression grew more serious. "And I wouldn't presume to tell you what you should do. But I've seen how you've come alive here these past weeks, helping with the repairs, talking with the townspeople, offering your knowledge." They had reached the boarding house porch. The evening was mild, the air fragrant with pine and the promise of spring. Nathan studied Penelope's face in the soft glow from the parlor windows. "And why would you care whether I stay or go?" he asked quietly. Color rose in Penelope's cheeks. "Because I've come to value your friendship, Mr. Young. Because I think Broken Pine would be enriched by your presence. And because—" she hesitated. "Because I believe there comes a time when wandering has served its purpose, and a new chapter must begin." The unspoken question hung between them whether that new chapter might include her. Nathan felt both terrified and exhilarated by the possibility. "I'll think about it," he promised. The next morning, Nathan rode out to look at the Wilkins place. It was modest compared to his former ranch, a small but solid cabin, a barn in need of some repairs, about 100 acres of land with access to a year-round creek. But it had potential, especially for someone willing to put in the work. As he sat on his horse surveying the property, Nathan found himself doing something he hadn't done in 3 years, making plans, thinking of a future. He could repair the barn, expand the cabin, gradually build a herd. The land could support a small but profitable operation, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine sharing that future with someone, specifically with Penelope Russell. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. She had her nursing career, her own path. Would she consider a life with a rancher who was just starting over? And was he ready to risk his heart again? Knowing the pain that could come from loss, Nathan returned to town with more questions than answers, but with a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for too long. That evening, he found Penelope in the boarding house garden, where she had been helping Mrs. Simmons tend the early spring plantings. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and there was dirt on her hands and a smudge on her cheek. Nathan thought she had never looked more beautiful. "I saw the Wilkins place today," he said without preamble. Penelope looked up, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "What did you think?" "It has potential." Nathan paused. "I've been thinking about what you said about wandering having served its purpose." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "And have you come to any conclusions?" "Not completely. But I know I've felt more alive these past weeks than I have in years." Nathan took a step closer. "I think that's largely because of you, Penelope." Her eyes widened slightly at his use of her given name for the first time. "Me. You made me remember what it's like to care about someone, to be part of something beyond myself." Nathan struggled to find the right words. "When I met you in Sweetwater, I was just existing. Now I'm beginning to live again." Penelope's expression softened. "I understand that journey. After Edward died, I thought my life was over too. It took me years to realize that honoring his memory meant living fully, not shutting myself away from possibilities." Nathan nodded, recognizing the parallel to his own experience. "I'm considering buying the Wilkins place," he said, "starting over here in Broken Pine." "I think that's wonderful, Nathan." Her smile was warm, genuine. "You have so much to offer this community." "There's one thing I need to know first." Nathan took a deep breath. "If I stay, is there a chance for us? Or am I misreading what's grown between us these past weeks?" Penelope's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "You're not misreading anything. I've come to care for you deeply, Nathan. More than I thought possible after losing Edward." Relief and joy surged through Nathan. He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I care for you too, Penelope, more than I can say. But there are practical matters to consider," she added. "I've committed to working at the clinic here for at least a year. James needs me nearby during his recovery, and you're just beginning to rebuild your life." "I'm not proposing we rush into anything," Nathan assured her. "I know we both need time. But I wanted to be sure there was a reason to put down roots here, beyond the land itself." Penelope's smile widened. "There is definitely a reason, Nathan Young." In that moment, with the garden coming to life around them and the setting sun painting the sky in shades of promise, Nathan felt the last of the numbness that had encased his heart for 3 years begin to melt away. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make, a new life to build. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he was looking toward the future with hope instead of emptiness. Nathan bought the Wilkins place the following week. The transaction was simple cash exchanged for a deed and a handshake with the elderly couple who were relieved to see their homestead passing to someone who appreciated its value. Mrs. Wilkins had tearfully shown Nathan around the cabin one last time, pointing out the apple trees she'd planted, the spring that never failed even in drought years, the best spots for a kitchen garden. Word spread quickly through Broken Pine that Nathan Young was becoming a permanent resident. Offers of help with repairs and improvements came from unexpected quarters. The miners volunteered to help dig a new well closer to the cabin. The schoolteacher's husband offered timber from his small sawmill at a reduced price. Mrs. Simmons insisted on providing curtains for the cabin windows to make it homey. James Russell, now well enough to resume light duties at the mine, proved to be a valuable ally. His engineering knowledge helped Nathan design improvements to the barn and plan irrigation for the fields. The two men developed a comfortable friendship based on mutual respect and shared interests. Penelope divided her time between her duties at the clinic, her brother's continued convalescence, and increasingly frequent visits to the Wilkins place, now being referred to simply as the Young Ranch, though Nathan had yet to decide on a formal name. She brought picnic lunches, helped plant a vegetable garden, and offered opinions on everything from the placement of the new corral to the color for the cabin's exterior. Their relationship deepened gradually, building on the foundation established during their journey and the weeks that followed. Nathan found himself looking forward to her visits with an anticipation that made the days between seem longer. They spoke of everything: their pasts, their hopes for the future, their views on the changing territory around them. By midsummer, the ranch was taking shape. Nathan had purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 good horses to complement Copper. The barn had been repaired, the cabin expanded with an additional room and a proper porch, and the garden was yielding its first vegetables. He had even hired a young man from town, the sheriff's nephew, to help with the daily work. On a warm July evening, Nathan and Penelope sat on the newly built porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. A mild breeze carried the scent of pine and the distant song of a whippoorwill. "I received a letter from Dr. Hammond today," Penelope said, breaking a comfortable silence. "He's asked me to consider joining his new practice in Denver." Nathan felt his heart constrict. "Denver, that's a considerable opportunity." Penelope nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It is. A growing city, a well-equipped hospital, the chance to work with the latest medical advancements." Nathan tried to keep his voice even. "When would you leave?" "I haven't decided to accept." Penelope turned to face him fully. "In fact, I've already written to decline." Relief washed over Nathan. "Are you sure? Denver would offer more than a small mining town's clinic. Perhaps in terms of medical facilities, yes, but there's more to life than one's profession." Her eyes met his, warm and certain. "My place is here, Nathan, with the people of Broken Pine, with James." She paused. "With you, if you'll have me." Nathan reached for her hand. "If I'll have you, Penelope, you've become the center of my world. These past months, watching you care for your patients, help your brother recover, bring life and color back to this old cabin, I've fallen in love with you so completely that the thought of you leaving feels like losing a part of myself." Tears shimmered in Penelope's eyes. "I love you too, Nathan. I wasn't looking for love when I asked you to guide me to Broken Pine. But somewhere along that journey, between bandits and campfires and getting to know the man behind the solitary facade, my heart made its choice." Nathan drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of all they'd overcome and all they hoped to build together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Penelope Russell. Not right away if you're not ready, but soon. Let's build this life together, the ranch, your nursing, whatever the future brings." Her smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. "Yes, Nathan Young, yes to all of it." They were married in October, when the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides and the first hint of winter crispness touched the air. The ceremony was held in Broken Pine's small church, filled to capacity with townsfolk who had come to respect Nathan and adore Penelope. James gave his sister away, his health fully restored and his pride in her evident in every step. Mrs. Simmons wept openly, declaring it the finest wedding Broken Pine had seen in a decade. Sheriff Hargrove and his wife hosted the celebration afterward in the town hall, with music provided by local miners who proved surprisingly talented with fiddle and guitar. As Nathan and Penelope danced together for the first time as husband and wife, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, he had been a broken man, riding away from everything that reminded him of loss. Now, he was embracing a future filled with possibility, with a woman whose smile had stopped him in his tracks that night in Sweetwater. "What are you thinking, husband?" Penelope asked, her eyes bright with happiness. "That I'm the luckiest man in the territory," he replied honestly. "And that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be. Even when we don't know that's where we're heading," she agreed, her hand warm in his. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, their home, Nathan looked up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. He thought of Sarah briefly, a bittersweet memory that no longer brought crippling pain. She would have approved of Penelope, he believed, and of the man he was becoming, one who could love again, who could build rather than simply exist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Young," he said softly, opening the door to their future. "Home," Penelope repeated, her smile as bright as the day it had first caught him, impossible to ignore. "I like the sound of that." In the years that followed, the young ranch prospered, growing from its modest beginnings into one of the most successful operations in the region. Nathan's knowledge of cattle and land management, combined with Penelope's practical approach to problems, proved to be a winning combination. Broken Pine changed too, evolving from a fading mining town into a community with diverse industries. The railroad finally came within 15 miles, bringing new opportunities for commerce. James Russell, fully recovered and now a respected mining engineer, helped transition the remaining mines to more sustainable operations, even as he developed interests in timber and water management. Nathan and Penelope welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah, in the spring following their marriage. 2 years later, a son joined the family, Thomas James, named for Nathan's brother and Penelope's brother. Their home expanded to accommodate their growing family, with rooms filled with books, music, and laughter. Penelope continued her nursing work, establishing a proper clinic in town with help from Dr. Hammond, who visited occasionally from Denver. She trained several local women in basic medical care, creating a network of health support throughout the surrounding valleys. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Penelope with a proper sign for the ranch entrance, Sweetwater Valley Ranch, commemorating both the town where they had met and the new valley they called home. She surprised him in return with news of their 3rd child, due in the summer. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Nathan reflected on the winding path that had brought him to this moment of contentment. "You ever think about how close I came to riding past Sweetwater that day?" he asked Penelope, who was nestled against his side, her hand in his. "If I'd decided to camp one more night on the trail, or taken the northern route instead?" "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," she replied, looking up at him with the same smile that had first captured his heart. "Some connections are meant to be, even when we're trying our hardest to avoid them." Nathan kissed her forehead gently. "I spent 3 years running from life after Sarah died. Then you stopped me with a smile I couldn't ignore, and everything changed. For both of us," Penelope reminded him. "I wasn't looking for love either, remember? Just a guide to Broken Pine. And instead, you found a husband, a home, and a rather chaotic life on a growing ranch," he chuckled, watching as Elizabeth attempted to teach her younger brother how to lasso a fence post. "I found exactly what I needed," Penelope corrected him. "A family, a purpose, and a love that makes every day an adventure." As twilight deepened around them and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Nathan Young held his wife close, grateful beyond words for the second chance at happiness he'd found when he least expected it. The cowboy who had ridden alone for so long had finally found his way home, guided there by a smile he couldn't ignore and the love that had followed.